Real questions, real answers for real life. Come on in and pull up a chair. You're at 1850 Main Street with Michael DelGiorno and David Zanotti.
The conversation continues today with the question, why couldn't Jim Jordan get to 217?
All right, so everybody's reporting on the news. There's no speaker. Jim Jordan had several votes, but he came up short. I like how you, in a historical perspective, show how this guy just tenaciously gets to a state house, gets to a state senate, gets to a United States House of Representatives, and then builds about 10 friends. Somewhere along the line, that 10 friends turned to 190. Why couldn't he get to 217?
Michael, that's one of the most significant questions that we're facing right now as a country, because it shows the inefficiency, even the impossibility of running America simply as if it's a two-party system inside Washington, D.C., as opposed to a place where people send their best and their brightest by the consent of the local governed to Washington to represent them. It's the difference between what happens at the bottom of the food chain versus what happens in the syndicate at the top of the food chain. Jim has never been a made member of that syndicate. He's climbed dramatically to have significant influence, but he's never sold out. Now, there's a lot of people on Capitol Hill who aren't sold out, but there's a lot of people on Capitol Hill who are. And in the case of the inability for the Republicans to get a speaker, that's real simple. People think the Republican Party is one party. Not even close. There are at least two, maybe three, maybe more parties. And the most powerful of those parties right now is the progressive part of the Republican Party. Now, how can you be a progressive and be a Republican? Well, it's very simple. You just are. You run in a district as an R, you get elected, and then you do everything that fits the progressive agenda. That's who you are. Now, a lot of times you can hide, because in a divided House and Senate situation, you can hide from conservative votes because they're not going anywhere anyways. You can hide. Maybe you vote for something that you doesn't fit your agenda, but you know it's not going anywhere. So it doesn't really matter. So you're protected by the fact that...
Or if they know it's going to pass, they can just not vote and not be held accountable for voting for it. Yeah, all kinds of tricks.
There's all kinds of ways to hide. But every now and then, they come out in full view. And when it comes to who's going to lead the House, they're out in full view right now. The reason that the Republican Party can't get a speaker is because they've got about 20 members who aren't Republicans at all. Saying them in name only, they're progressives. They are just as leftist as the most leftist progressive. They just dress differently and they hide their true agenda. They will be happy to have the Republican Party never have a strong, principled leader, because they don't want one, because they're playing for the other side.
Well, it's kind of come out with the attacks on Israel from Palestinian territories, and that exposed the squad. Mm-hmm. In the case of the speakership for the Republicans, we finally got to somebody. Now, he never quite got to a vote, but this is somebody that codified same-sex marriage. I mean, we were, but it is fun. It is funny that we know who all the real extreme progressives are of the Democrats, probably because the mainstream media is proud to sell that, and so it outs them. But people don't realize who the progressives are within the Republican Party. And they're just happy to get their R's on election night, right?
The Democrats are not a single party either. You mentioned the squad. Then you've got Bernie's group as well. Mm-hmm. All right, you have the Congressional Black Caucus. They vote as if they're their own country. Now, they come together always to defeat their common enemy, which is the other party. But if it's not something that has to do with defeating the other party, they're split all over the place. On something like Israel, it's frightening and embarrassing to see what some of these members of Congress have said in defiance of American foreign policy, in defiance of the nation of Israel, in defiance of voters and the majority of Americans' support for Israel, and they don't care.
We used to always talk about grassroots versus grass tops, like the original Tea Party, before it got absorbed, as you know.
Yes, as according to Michelle Bachmann, before it got
absorbed by the Republican
But
no,
Party,
it was an authentic grassroots movement. So you have grassroots, grass tops, or as I would say, grassroots tends to be home driven, Main Street driven. Whereas your party elite and grass tops tends to be Washington driven. That's something big to keep your eye on. The other is this two-party system isn't so two-party after all, is it?
No.
Because there's multiple parties within the parties.
There are multiple parties in the party. So where do you go with that? Well, first off, it starts with basic math. If you want to see the kind of conservative policies that are talked about at Republican national conventions but seem to never become a part of our public policy, then what you have to do, we the people have to do, is we have to find people that are willing to run in districts on those principles and work just like Jim Jordan worked his tail off till eventually they could win. They have to work their way up and win. Now, you say, there's some places where those people have no choice, no chance. Of course, there are places. I don't think that you're going to see a Jim Jordan-like candidate in some of the major urban centers of America. They're not going to get elected.
Too difficult.
We get that. Okay, we get that. And that, by the way, is also a form of gerrymandering. People think that gerrymandering is something that the Republicans do because they're a minority party that manages to win by gerrymandering. Let me tell you something. We've done a lot of study on gerrymandering. We've sat in a lot of committee hearings and read a lot of books and been through a lot of votes. The gerrymandering is vicious on both sides always. Mm-hmm. Always. That's what politicians do. They protect their syndicate. So if we're going to get a conservative viewpoint into our congressional policies, we have to have more conservatives. We have to have a voting majority of people who believe in the founding and in conservative principles. It's that simple. It's not good enough to elect Republicans. Now, where does that get in trouble? Well, it gets in trouble with people like Karl Rove and people like Newt Gingrich. Their philosophy is just elect people that are conservative enough to win. Then Republicans will have the majorities, and then they'll do something. Guess what? Those people who are just conservative enough to win, when the really tough votes come for true reforms, they take a walk. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure, whether in their House or in the Senate. Like Arlen Specter, when key reforms were coming down the road years ago in the United States Senate. Pat Toomey wanted to run for Arlen Specter's seat. Specter had been there forever, and Toomey was a solid, young, up-and-coming conservative. And President George W. Bush and Karl Rove went out and said, no, you got to keep Specter in office. You don't throw away a Republican vote in the Senate for a risk like Toomey. So they tanked Toomey. Specter was elected, and then within months, he defected and became a Democrat. Literally changed parties. I mean, that's what happens constantly when you simply work to elect people who are conservative enough. Now, maybe that means there's some districts that, you're not going to get a Republican elected. There are plenty of territories left in this country that solid thinking, well-funded, hardworking people can win. And we're not going to see conservative policies until you have so many conservatives that they overwhelm the progressives. Now, here's the thought no one will buy, but it's true. I don't like it, but it's true. You mentioned in our prior conversation, wasn't there a time when we actually had conservative Democrats as well? Yeah, there was.
Yeah, a lot of them.
There was a lot of them. There were people who ran in districts where there was the majority of Democrats, like Parma, Ohio, for example, a union town with a lot of European immigrant families and a lot of Roman Catholics, and their tradition was to vote Democrat, and they elected one of the most conservative Democrats in modern history for a lifetime as their representative in Congress, and then they elected his son. Then they put his son into politics as well. All right. And this guy's name was Ron Model, and he was a conservative. Anybody remember Scoop Jackson? Anybody remember Howard Baker? There were lots of people who decided that they would not going to drink the Kool-Aid and be made members.
Or anybody remember John F. Kennedy, who ran as a conservative? Nixon ran as a liberal. It's funny today. I don't even know if it goes that deep, does it? It's like whatever the hot issue is. So you have a good performance on some talking head television show about the border, or you stand up to support Donald Trump, or, I'm trying to think what other some of these hot button things are, boom, then you get branded a conservative. And you really just, do we have a test for conservatism, or is it just whatever the hot button television issue is?
That's a great question. Yeah. And what does, I guess you were talking about grass tops and grassroots. We ought to talk about, I don't know what terms. You'll come up with a clever term for this, I'm sure. But there's a big difference between the pop culture issues of the day and the principles of the founding.
Right.
There's a lot of difference between playing the power games inside the syndicate and deciding you're going to actually represent your constituency. You know, there's an old story about Davy Crockett and a guy named Mr. Bunce.
Oh, love this story.
Do you love
it?
Okay. Davy Crockett went, and he, of course, he literally was the embodiment of what it meant to be a representative. I mean, he was beloved by the people of Tennessee. So he was elected to Congress, and he went up there, did a pretty good job. And then one season, there was a bill that was brought to Congress regarding a fire in Georgetown. And Davy Crockett voted to appropriate federal dollars for the relief of the survivors of the fire in Georgetown. And he went home, and he was out shaking hands with his constituents across fence lines. And he got over to Mr. Bunce's farm, and Mr. Bunce said, "Davy, you lost my vote." And he said, "What did I do?" He said, "You did what the government's not supposed to. You gave other people's money to a relief fund. Now, Davy, if you wanted to give that money out of your pocket or you wanted me to give it out of mine, I would have done so. And I bet you would too. But you've got no right spending other people's money in that way. That's not what the government's supposed to be doing. That's supposed to be private charity. You did the wrong thing." You know, Crockett apologized to him, never made a mistake like that again, and went back to Congress. And the next time he had an opportunity like that, he went ahead and made the contribution out of his own pocket. Now, that's a true story.
That's pop versus principle.
Exactly. That's representative government, because I am answerable to the people. Now, Michael, I know, again, other people are going to laugh and say, pshaw. They're going to say, come on, you don't understand where we really are. No, I got to tell you, I've spent 43 years doing this. I do it every day, and I've got a wonderful team of people that do public policy every day in multiple states and in the federal government. You know how deep our credentials run. The fact of this is, right now, one of the greatest untapped areas of strength are in mid-sized towns, in towns like Youngstown, Ohio. There are pockets in towns all over the United States of America where Black leaders can rise to the top. It doesn't matter what party they're in, solve their own problems, and send their best leaders to Congress, independent of the Republican or the Democrat Party, to stand for the things of faith and family that the Black community stands for. The same thing is eventually going to come true in the Hispanic communities,
Yes.
where there are people who are going to be able to do the same thing, and they need bear no allegiance to the Democrats or the Republicans. Now, they can caucus with either party once they get there. You're allowed to do that. But what would happen if we had a new group of leaders rise up to say principle over party, first, foremost, and always, and they stood for what they believed in?
What would make a bigger impact on America? More Ted Cruz's or more Joe Manchins?
Oh, wow, that's a really great question. And I would say that Manchin plus, as significant as Manchin is, Manchin's not enough. We need more.
Right.
We need those people across. We need men, we need women, we need every portion of our culture in regards to race. We need people that will go again and say, I represent my community. Now, why will that work? Because if they truly represent their community, they can never be unelected for representing their community. They can go in and cast a vote with a Republican agenda, a vote with a Democrat agenda, or a vote on their own agenda. Who's going to throw them out? Well, they won't get committee seats. Fine. Who needs a committee seat?
Who needs them?
Until they need your vote. Then you know what you say when they need your vote? Oh, by the way, if you want my vote, I'll take a committee seat, please. That's the cost.
Well, how well is it working the way it is? I mean, isn't that what we're all seeing with this speakership?
You're batting more than 300 right now.
When you subscribe to 1850 Main Street, you're the first to find out what's happening next with new guests, publications, and events. And when you spread the word about 1850 Main Street, you're helping others find real answers to the real questions facing America right now. To learn more, visit 1850mainstreet.com. And please, tell a friend.
Well, I mean, it's dysfunctional. But, I always go back to Oklahoma Right to Life and a lunch I had one time. You always use the example of the border. Now, Democrats and Republicans, by the way, this goes back to they were attacking Reagan for this back in the primaries in 79 and 80 because
this goes back to the 80s.
Yeah, because he gave amnesty along the border. George W. Bush took some hits on this. But I mean, how many years have we been discussing the border? There's a reason why it never gets settled. They like the fight. They like the division. Look, I am thoroughly convinced that if we go back to that first analogy, which is party elite versus we the people, the party elite want us all fighting. As long as we're fighting, we're controllable.
Exactly.
And there's instant, I had somebody look across the table and say, what we really need is a human life amendment. This is nonsense. These different stages and battles and, no. We have about a 9 to 10 point advantage just, with this issue. And I'm looking at this guy like, are you kidding me? You think a 9-point political advantage is worth one single baby's life? Not only am I not having dinner with you ever again, I don't want anything to do with your organization ever again.
And Michael, you can talk about the life issue. You can talk about the border and security and all of these things. It's the same situation. You see, the country still works if we have the faith to work it. Now, we are being anesthetized. We are being, they're burning our brains, making us believe that it could never be a representative government again, that it always has to be a two-party syndicate, that there's no other way but that way. Michael, that's not true. That's not how we were founded. It's not what Washington and Adams wanted for us. And I will tell you that even though Jim Jordan didn't become a speaker, and even though Jim Jordan's a conservative, and even though Jim Jordan's a Republican, Jim Jordan is an example of someone who has made an impact from a position of beliefs, not simply party. Now, Bernie Sanders is one too.
Sure.
Don't tell me it can't be done. Bernie Sanders is an independent Democrat who chooses to caucus with the Democrats, who's had a tremendous influence in the government. It can be done. What we have to do is build the constituencies at the base level, find people that are qualified with courage who will run for the office, and then support them in such a way so that when the Washington Post issues a 40-page diatribe against them, bringing up everything, including how many bristles are in their toothbrush, that the people who put them there will keep them there because they won't fold. America still works if we work it. Now, you say, well, what are the odds of that happening? Wait a minute. We just talked about two examples in our lifetimes, Bernie Sanders, Jim Jordan. There's lots more. America still works when we work it. Now, it's not easy to run for Congress and win. Probably doesn't happen for many people their first time out. You got to build your way there to build that constituency. It is a life goal and ambition. But there are enough good people, if they all gave a little bit of time up from streaming videos and football leagues and sports wagering and all the stuff that gets in our ways, if we gave a little bit of time, a little bit of effort, a little bit of money, we could find the numbers to depopulate the syndicate and replace those seats with real representatives again.
Well, there's two different angles I want to dust out with you. One is it's so dysfunctional. It is completely dysfunctional. And how do you regain that function? And I think some of it points to mainstream media. Like I look at talk radio, of which I've spent 35 years of my career in. Why did we take the bait from politics? Why did we take all these political minefields into our essence? What? To do a scrimmage to the death? Like we used to have cockfighting in Oklahoma, which seems so backwoods that people go watch roosters with knives attached to them, just dice themselves up. But that's what they want us doing every day on Facebook. That's what they want us doing on Twitter. That's what they want us doing every day on the radio. And I'm like, why would we play that game? And there used to be a time that we would send good, honest men that we knew, some not so honest that we knew, and they would go behind closed doors and they'd get things done. I don't think it's possible to get anything done, because if you ever took a stance, it would be compromise. The talk radio guys would be the first to crucify them for being a statesman and so on. So I think it's got to start at the bottom with the people and then remove the career-long mold.
This is a part of the quest of what I do at the American Policy Roundtable and the public scoring. People say, well, congratulations, Don Quixote. Let me know when you catch that windmill. But we've been at it for 43 years. And I will tell you once again, you say, show me one example. Well, we just showed you two, one from the left, one from the right. It can be done because Americans do care, but it takes us accepting the personal responsibility for this government again. That's the breakdown. The breakdown is we want to send our money in and get our freedom back. Nope, it doesn't work that way. We have to earn our freedom in every generation. We have to refresh this form of representative government with new minds and new hearts and new eyes and new strength. We have to own this process. You say, well, man, that's a lot of work. Yeah, so is bondage. So is totalitarianism. So is tyranny. See, it's been so long since we knew what freedom didn't feel like that we have come to believe that it's free. We have to change. But if we change, the system still has a room, an opportunity for us to change the whole system. We just need more people to try it.
A question I promised to ask you, these aren't staged. I mean, I really want to hear your answer.
Yeah, because I don't know what you're about to ask me.
Well, yeah, that too. But in terms of Jim Jordan's story and the Freedom Caucus, and I remember being in Washington for one of Barack Obama's State of the Union addresses. I would say that was at the height of the Freedom Caucuses, the excitement and buildup. And they were probably at their highest power at that point. Then Donald Trump came along. And I saw the Freedom Caucus gravitate towards Trump, but it's the same kind of thing I was doing with the analogy with talk radio. Why did they let them? Do you think the Freedom Caucus is stronger today because of Trump or weaker?
That's a great question. I don't think I know the answer to that one. I know that Trump as a disruptive technology really bothered the syndicate bosses in the Congress. I mean, let's face it. Do you think McConnell's got any love lost with Trump? And we certainly know the Democrat leaders don't want anything to do with him. Trump's a disruptive technology. He poses a threat to their empire. Let's remember, they control the budget. The president can rant and rave and do everything he wants, but those 535 people are going to be spending $5.4 trillion every year. And the president's a part of the process, but he doesn't control it. The Congress does. So Trump was a disruptive technology. They don't want anybody messing up their game. Michael, what a job, huh? Can you imagine being in majority leadership in the House or in the Senate? All that money, all those lobbyists at your beck and call. I mean, if you're smart on the ethics laws, you can probably never ever have to buy a meal in Washington, D.C. You're vested with a federal pension after 5 years. You're given over $1 million per office every year to run your office, your every session. So you have. I mean, come on, this is the best job any of these people are ever going to get.
Let me try to dismount off the balance beam and stick my landing, but bear with me. So can you stay too long? Of course you can, and you become part of the problem. It's not enough to elect good people and hope for the best. Why even good people with good motives stay too long and become a part of the problem. Things need to return from being grass tops and party elites driven from Washington and return home and to Main Street and grassroots. Well, I'll give you 3 because we want power going from the bottom up, not power from the top coming down. But we had 3 really good examples of that people took a ride on. One is the Tea Party, which was a natural movement and got a lot of Americans involved. And they started getting into the context of a representative republic and a government of, for, and by the people. And,
right. Till the syndicate bought off all their leaders.
And then bought off all their leaders and absorbed them. But all right, so there was one. The Freedom Caucus I saw as one, somewhat derailed by Trump. There are many out there listening right now that think Trump was one. So where are Americans when the Tea Party is almost distant history, the Freedom Caucus begins to become history, and Donald Trump, well, if he loses, I don't think he ever goes away, but they become disparaged. And they just say, enough of this. It's all a bunch of crap. It doesn't matter if I pay attention. But they don't go and get involved at local government or state government. They turn to reality TV, to music, to binging Netflix.
Right.
And then where are we? I think there's like a real cliff in our near future.
Well, here's a lesson from history that is proven in America to be always true. Most people don't have the gift of leadership. They know it, and they don't want to lead. Leaders are hard to find. That's why we need to be careful with them. But America has always led through tipping points. You don't get to 51% on anything until you get to 10% of something. That 10% grows to 18%. That 18% grows to 25%. And by the time you've got about a 25% consensus in a community, whether it's a House race, whether it's a Senate race, whether it's a Congress race, or whether it's a revolution against the mother country, we forget that when America began at the Declaration of Independence, 50% of the people were uncertain what to do. The critical mass came when they got to about 25% inside the leadership community. And then other thinking people who weren't prepared to lead were prepared to follow good leaders. So there is a tipping point always. So you don't have to have 51% of the vote to change things. You have to get started. You got to get to 10%. Then you've got to get to 25%. Then suddenly you have a momentum that gives you a chance to take that shot at 51%. And when you crest over that 51%, and if you stay faithful to what you're doing, then who knows? One day you're going to be sitting in a situation where you're going to have 190 votes for the Speaker of the House. Even though you
need 217.
Even though you need 217, but you only started with 10. All right. It's a question of critical mass. It takes time. But look, there's people that God gives the gift of leadership. They're supposed to lead. And there are people who God gives the gifts of administration. They're supposed to help facilitate leaders. I mean, I personally believe if we pray that God would show us how to restore representative republic again, he would, if we were willing to do the work that it takes. And I'll tell you right now, what's surprising, it's not really bad work. Yeah, sometimes you got to stand out in the rain. Yeah, sometimes you got to go out on an evening to visit with people or go to a meeting when you'd rather be sitting at home watching Netflix. I mean, there's a lot of things that you might have to do that are inconveniences. But whenever we do this message in the American Mission Series, here's what ends up happening. At the end of the series, all the people who come forward with tears streaming down their face, when I make this very same presentation, they come forward, and you know who they all are? They're people from European countries whose parents endured through the totalitarian regime at the end of the 21st century, at the end of the 20th century. They're all the people who lost loved ones to people like Hitler and Stalin. They're people from South Korea, people from Vietnam, people who have escaped from tyranny. And they come with tears streaming down their face saying, I never understood why Americans don't love the freedom that they have.
Take it for granted. I said a lot during COVID. It revealed more than it actually did. This whole speaker debacle.
Yeah.
It's revealed a lot more than really is at stake, right? Like I don't even think you care. Do you even care if they ever get another speaker? Who cares?
Well, this much I'm sure the speakership's overrated. What they should be doing is getting the trains to run on time. The speaker shouldn't be that big of a deal because the members and the committee should be so strong that the speaker doesn't really matter. But that's another subject.
For another cup of coffee.
The conversations are just getting started. To get connected, check out 1850mainstreet.com. We don't data mine anyone or sell your information. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single conversation. We'll see you next time here at 1850 Main Street.